All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to Maximize Your Savings with Integrated Tankering, our first webinar on our new Fuel Advisor Tankering product. In this webinar, you're going to learn how Fuel Advisor works as part of ForeFlight Dispatch, how it can automatically analyze your upcoming flights, automatically optimize your tankering scenarios for each of those flights, and just save you a lot more money on each of your flights using tankering. So here we have our presenters for today. I will let each of them introduce themselves. So you first, Caitlin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin Galloway. I am the product manager for Dispatch at ForeFlight. I'm a private pilot, and I've been with ForeFlight since 2015.
Thanks, Caitlin. Next up, Daniel, your turn.
Hey, everyone. I'm Daniel Dahl. I'm Director of Engineering for ForeFlight Dispatch. I've been with ForeFlight for 7 years now.
Thanks, Daniel. On our agenda for today will be a Fuel Advisor demo led by Caitlin, with Daniel serving as the color commentary provider. That demo will start with a flight setup for the automatic analysis, just showing how you have to input multiple flights as part of your regular planning process, and Fuel Advisor will then look at all of those flights when determining which ones to include in the analysis. Caitlin will then walk through the inputs and outputs of the tankering calculation itself, which of those are automatic and which ones are manually adjustable by you. And she will look at updating flights with the recommended tankering after the tankering calculation completes, and showing how you can update all of the flights involved at once with the new tankering information without going to each one to update the fuel manually. Before we begin, just a few pointers about the GoToWebinar system. You can ask questions via the GoToWebinar message panel on the right. You can see a screenshot of it there. We'll be responding to these as much as we can during the presentation, and we'll be responding to a few others during the live Q&A at the very end. But we do strongly encourage you to submit your questions as soon as you think of them. Don't hold on to them and think that you're going to have it answered once you get to the Q&A. If you don't ask until you see Q&A on the screen, you're probably not going to have your question answered. So definitely share those questions as soon as you can think of them, and we'll be responding to them as much as we can. If you're having any audio problems or any kind of problems in general, we definitely recommend joining from a computer, not a mobile device. We just find that our webinars tend to be smoother when you're viewing them from a computer rather than your iPad or iPhone. And lastly, this session is being recorded, and you'll be able to view it or share it with others at foreflight.com/webinars starting tomorrow. So let's get started with an overview of Fuel Advisor and the product that Fuel Advisor is within, which is ForeFlight Dispatch. So very briefly, ForeFlight Dispatch is a component of ForeFlight Web that delivers next-generation, multi-user, schedule-to-mobile flight planning to give your flight department greater efficiency and productivity. So Fuel Advisor is only one of a large number of capabilities and features that are accessible within Dispatch, so we'll keep this overview fairly brief. This is a good representation of the entire ForeFlight ecosystem, which is centered on ForeFlight Dispatch. On the left there, you can see we have supported scheduling systems, feeding flight plans into Dispatch where flight planners can work on them. At the bottom, we have the trip support integrations that Dispatch supports, and so these allow your team to work side by side with approved personnel from your trip support provider of choice, if it's one of those three, and work on flight plans. They can upload flight documents, itineraries, anything like that, just as your own crew members would. And then on the right, you have ForeFlight Mobile, which is where the flight planners or the self-dispatching pilots, it works for either one, they're working in Dispatch, they plan the flights, and then they release those flights to ForeFlight Mobile, where the pilots can then go and conduct the flight, brief it, debrief it, all that. And then within ForeFlight Dispatch itself, you have these four capabilities. We've already done webinars on two of these, on Runway Analysis and Weight and Balance. Maybe sometime in the future, we will do one on EAPIS as well. But what we're talking about today is that box in the lower left corner, Tankering, which, of course, the product for that itself is Fuel Advisor. So what Fuel Advisor allows you to do is maximize your savings with an integrated tankering solution. It's all automated. It's highly integrated with the dispatch ecosystem. And so essentially you just have to set up your flights like you normally would, go into Fuel Advisor, check a few boxes, put in a bit of basic fee information, and then hit a button, and it will spit out the optimal tankering for those flights. As I said, it's seamlessly integrated with dispatch, so there's nothing else you need to do to set it up other than just planning the flights like you normally would. It automatically analyzes those legs, any closely spaced legs within 3 days of each other, to identify those tankering opportunities. Fuel Advisor then spits out, in addition to the recommended tankering for each flight, it gives you a very detailed cost comparison, showing not only the total amount of uplifted fuel, the cost of that fuel, the facility fee paid, and it does always try to avoid facility fees if it's advantageous to do so, which it isn't always, but most of the time it is. And it shows you the trip fuel increase, which is the amount that the tankered fuel increases the total required trip fuel. Obviously, carrying more fuel means you need to burn more fuel to get there. And lastly, as Fuel Advisor is performing this tankering calculation, it is also taking into account these other aspects of the flight plan, such as weight and balance limits and runway analysis limits. It's actively running those calculations, and if the weight and balance or the runway analysis calculation imposes a lower maximum weight limit on the flight, Fuel Advisor will know about that, and it will take that into account and make sure that you're not planning to carry more fuel than you would actually be able to take off with based on the weight and balance and runway analysis calculations. So again, this isn't just a separate tool that's built into ForeFlight Dispatch and you have to go and manually load up all the information. It is truly seamlessly integrated with the dispatch platform. And so it's just about as plug and play as you can get with an advanced capability like this. If you don't believe me, you can just watch Caitlin's demo.
Thanks, Sam. Today we're going to be working in the dispatch tab. So when you sign into ForeFlight.com, you can navigate to the dispatch tab here at the top left. I'm going to go ahead and create a few different legs to set up for this scenario. So I'll click New Flight at the top left. Go ahead and collapse this sidebar. And today I'm going to be planning with a Challenger 650. Our first leg is going to be Oakland to San Francisco. And we definitely want to make sure that we configure this as much as we can, because we want the tankering scenario to take into consideration all of those different factors. So we can choose an alternate. We can also choose an FBO from within this view. Choose our crew. I'll go ahead and put me and Daniel in here. We can choose a route string. I'll go ahead and hit save at the bottom right. And we can get into more detailed weight and balance and runway analysis as well. So if we have any passengers, we can add some folks in here. Add some cargo. If we make our way over to the runway analysis tab, dispatch will automatically select the best runway and engine out procedure for your best max takeoff weight. But of course you can come in here and change the runway if you need to make any changes. So let's say we're going to go ahead and choose this one for this flight. And once we've got all of that set up, we can go back to the flight tab. We've already saved it. I'll click save again. And then let's plan our next leg. So at the top center here, I'm going to click next flight. From San Francisco, we're going to go to Teterboro. Again, planning any additional items that we need. We've got the same crew, same passengers on board, let's say. We can choose a recommended route. Hit save at the bottom right. And of course, if we need to get more into the details, if we want to check the runway that's been selected, we can come in here, take a look, change the runway if needed. I'll go ahead and leave it with the suggestion for now. Continuing to our next leg, I'll click that next flight button again. And I want to point out here that I'm manually creating these flights, one after the other using the next flight button, but you can set these up any way you like. You could be building these at different times. These could be coming in from your scheduling system. So it's really just once those flights are created and they're in the flights list, you can use them in Fuel Advisor. So we'll do just a couple more legs here. Let's go to New Orleans. Choose a route. Go ahead and hit save here. We will let the dispatch system auto recommend a runway for us. Say that looks good, and we'll do one more leg. So our last leg for this example, we'll go to Sugarland in Houston. And again, we'll just throw in a couple extra details here. Select our route, check our runway, and hit save. So if I go back to the Flights tab really quickly, just to show you what I just created. So I'll search for Caitlin. And here are the 4 legs that I just created. So as I mentioned, I just created these manually one at a time using that next flight button, but these could have come in any manner. So now that they're all in the flights list, I can go into any one of these flights. I'll just click edit to go back into the flight planning view. And I will click on Fuel Advisor. And we'll give this just a minute to pull in the relevant flights. And we'll explain here up at the top. You'll find up to 3 flights for this tail, this Challenger 650, with the matching destination and departure. Flights more than 3 days, 72 hours from time of departure to time of departure apart will not be considered. So we have a little window that we're going to use to guess what we think should come into this tankering scenario, and then you can modify it from there. Daniel, do you want to add anything there?
Yes, if you have more legs, you can load them either at the beginning or at the end of your desired trips.
Yeah, and actually this is a good example here. So we've got New Orleans at the bottom, but as you know, we just made another leg after that. So we can click this button, it's illuminated to load more legs. And then we can load in that last Sugarland leg as well. One thing you'll notice on the left side here as well is that you can exclude a leg. So if you don't want one of your legs to be included in the tankering scenario, you can exclude that.
Yes, and the reason you can only exclude the first leg and the last leg is they all need to be connected to one another. And if you exclude a leg in the middle of your trip, then the flight becomes disconnected, and we can't have that when we are speaking about tankering scenarios.
Thanks, Daniel. So now that we're in this view, we want to take a look and make sure that all of the legs that we want to plan with are in here. So we've talked about loading legs, excluding legs. Let's just look through the first column here on the left and make sure that what we want is currently in the scenario. So we've got Oakland to San Francisco to Teterboro to New Orleans to Sugarland. So everything that I just planned, everything I want to be in here is in here. Moving over to the next column, the FBO column, we want to make sure, if we haven't chosen them already, we want to choose our FBO and our fuel vendor. So if I click the drop down, this tool is automatically integrated with JetFuelX. So if you've got your fuel cards input into the ForeFlight environment, you're going to see your contract pricing here. You'll also see retail. So we can go ahead and choose one of our best prices. And of course, once we do choose an FBO, if there are multiple fuel vendors, if you had more than one card, for example, you can choose which card you want to use. So we'll just go through the FBOs, make sure that all looks good. Just go ahead and grab a couple here. And now we've got our FBO selections. Daniel, is there anything you want to say about the FBO section before I move on?
So right now, we don't automatically choose the FBO and fuel vendor based on best price. It's up to you to choose that manually right now. We are planning to automate that in the future so you can have preferred fuel vendors at an FBO. It's already now possible to automatically select the FBO based on the airport through the operational rules feature in Dispatch.
Thanks, Daniel. Once we've got our FBOs selected, we can move over to the fuel/fee column. The first thing you're going to see here is that fuel price. And of course, that's going to be automatically filling in from the FBO and fuel vendor that you just selected. So this number is going to fill in automatically. If you do have an additional agreement with an FBO, you can just come in here and manually change this. If this is, $5, for example, instead of $5.60, you can just update that, no problem. So once you've confirmed your fuel prices, you want to take a look at the facility fees and the waived at amounts. So if there is a facility fee, you're going to want to make sure that you've got the correct number in there for that aircraft type and for that airport. And of course, the waived at amount in gallons. Once you do enter this the first time, like for Oakland, for a Challenger, this price will be sticky. So the next time that you come in here and you plan for that airport with that aircraft type, that facility fee, that waived at amount is going to automatically fill in for you. So I've already got facility fees and waived at amounts in here, but of course, if anything has changed since the last time that I came to this airport, I can make any sort of minor updates, change any items. Just make sure that these numbers look correct for the latest information that you have. So once we've confirmed that our fuel and our facility fees, all of that pricing is correct, the last thing we're going to check before we ask for our recommendation is our fuel at shutdown. So what you're going to see here by default is the default reserve fuel that you have set up for that aircraft profile. So we're assuming that you're going to be starting with reserves only in the tank. But of course, if that number is different, you can just change that fuel at shutdown value. Once we do that, we're going to scroll down, and on the bottom left, we'll click recommended tankering. And that's going to take into consideration all of the things that we just updated: the flight plans, the routing, runway analysis, the FBOs, the prices, the fees. Everything is coming into this one view to try to find you the best savings possible. Once that calculation is done, you can see this first pop-up showing you total savings. And then, of course, we can close this and take a look at all of the details. So at the bottom on the right side here, we've got just an overview of fee cost, fuel cost, and savings. And then we can get into all of the details on the right side of the page. So Daniel, can you do just a quick overview of the cost comparison and the metrics columns?
In the cost comparison column, you can first see how many pounds you uplifted and how many gallons that is. Then you got your total fuel cost for that airport. You can see how many dollars you paid in the facility fee. And at the bottom, we show how many pounds of fuel you burn for bringing an additional 1,000 pounds. And this gives you an idea of how expensive it is to tanker additional fuel on this leg. The more fuel you put on, the more fuel you burn by doing so. That gives you kind of a rough idea how much you need to save in order for tankering to be worth it. In the metrics column, we see how close we are to the limits for this flight. We can see the actual values on the left and then the limits of the aircraft on the right. We do take into consideration both weight and balance and runway analysis. And in this case, we can see that we are limited by the runway we picked earlier. And that gives us a total takeoff weight of 48,081 pounds. The takeoff fuel in this case is right at the limit. We tanker everything possible. And we can see that our landing weight limit is also our limiting factor in this scenario.
Thanks, Daniel, for that breakdown. Just to add to that, you'll see that these they basically have turned to an orange color. So that's letting you know you're within 5% of your limits. And of course, just like anywhere else in ForeFlight, if you are over your limits, these values are going to turn red. This, of course, right now, we haven't changed anything yet. This is the recommended scenario, right? So this is what we think is best. But sometimes you might need to take more fuel than we recommend or less fuel than we recommend. So, of course, you can come in here and make changes to the uplift values and see how that affects your total savings at the bottom, affects your runway and weight limits, all of those items. So just for example, if we come in here and do, let's say, 9,000 pounds, you can see now our max uplift has been, we've stepped over that line, and on the right, we can see we're over our limits. You can also see the savings are going to change. Currently it's showing 0 because this just isn't a viable solution for you. So let's do 6874 again. And you can see calculating tankering at the top right there. And now we're back within limits. We are within 5% of our limits, but we're not over. So you can come in here, play with these numbers, and like I said, see how those savings are going to change. Once we're happy with these numbers, if we want to take a look at the snapshot of this information that's going to be sent to the crew, we can click Generate Report. And this will, by default, be included in the briefing as well, so you don't need to do anything to make sure that the crew gets it. It's going to show up. We'll show it to you in a second, what that looks like. So this will give them an overview of the tankering scenario that we suggested so that they can understand the context for, here's why I want you to uplift this much, and just all the details around when and where they should get fuel. Once we're happy with all of our uplift numbers and how our savings looks, we can click Apply Scenario to Flights. And when we're doing that, that's going to take all of the planning we just did here out of the scenario and into the actual flight plans. So now if we go back to flight, and we'll just go back to the flight that we started in, but you'll see now that the fuel policy is showing manual fuel, and there's our manual fuel value. One last thing I want to show you here is if we open up the briefing, and we've got our navlog at the top, just like we're used to seeing. And then just after the navlog and just before the weather briefing, we've got that tankering report here. And then you move into, the normal briefing. So like I said, that will just get added automatically for your crew to see and have that information as well. All right, so we've done our tankering scenario, and of course you can come in here, you can do that with any airport pairs. Last thing I'm going to do is hit save, and I will hand it back to Sam for Q&A.
All right, thanks, Caitlin. Great job. So before we get to Q&A, just a couple of links and web pages you can go to learn more about this. ForeFlight.com/fuel advisor is where you can learn more. Honestly, you're probably not going to learn anything on that page that you didn't learn from this webinar, but feel free to go check it out. You can sign up to get started at ForeFlight.com/fuel advisor form. You just have to fill out some information about your flight department, how many pilots you have, how many planners you have, and that will then let our sales team know that you're interested in talking about this and possibly starting a demo and free trial. You can register for more webinars and watch past ones at foreflight.com/webinars, which is also where you can watch the recording of this webinar tomorrow. And you can contact sales directly at sales@foreflight.com. So let's get on to some questions. All right, first question here. Do you have to have ForeFlight Dispatch in order to use Fuel Advisor? Caitlin or Daniel, does one of you want to grab that?
Yeah, I can take that. So you do need to have ForeFlight Dispatch. That's going to be a prerequisite today for you to add on Fuel Advisor.
Cool. Okay, next one. Are fuel prices pulled directly from ForeFlight? In our department, we often get discounts based on contract fuel prices negotiated by AFfuel, CAA, etc., and we bring fuel releases with us. How could this be integrated into Fuel Advisor? Caitlin, do you want to take that one as well?
Yeah. So what we recommend, and I think we've talked about this a little bit in the webinar, what you'll want to do is take all of your contract fuel pricing, your fuel cards, and get those set up in JetFuelX. You can do that within Dispatch, within ForeFlight on the web, rather. And once you've got those in there, those prices are going to automatically show up for you. So if you don't have that set up, we're just going to show you retail. You'll have to do a little bit more work on your end. So definitely recommend, if you don't have JetFuelX set up with your cards and your pricing, definitely look into that, and you can reach out to us to help you with that as well.
All right, next one. Does the Fuel Advisor feature need to be turned on? I don't see it in my ForeFlight Dispatch login. Now, what could be the reason for that?
That's correct. So we're just kind of starting to take this live today. So if you would like to see it and get a trial for it, that's kind of how we're starting with this. So if you would reach out to sales@foreflight.com or your account executive, if you've got their direct contact information, they can get a trial set up for you.
All right, next question. Can you input a home base fuel if you don't use an FBO at home?
You absolutely can. So anything that you saw on the screen, and we can of course show this as well, but anything that is in that blue text is something that you can modify. So if you start at home and you have an even better price, you can just punch that in and we'll do the calculations with that number.
Okay, next up. Does the tankering calculation take into account the threshold changes in fuel pricing, i.e. 500 to 1,000 gallons versus 1,001 to 1,500 gallons, and then utilize that in the algorithm?
I can answer that one, Sam. Yes, it does. So the tankering algorithm do take all the price breaks into account.
Great, yeah, and I remember seeing that those price tiers are listed underneath each of the FBOs on the left in Fuel Advisor, so it even just shows you directly what you can expect there. All right, next question. We have agreements with certain airports to take X amount of gallons. Can we manually input that in the uplift column like we can manually change the price per gallon.
Yeah, I can take that one. So you absolutely can change that. Just like any other field with the blue text, you can change whatever uplift you need to take at a certain place, and we will do the calculations based on that.
All right, next one. We don't have dispatchers. Is this available to flight crew without the ForeFlight Dispatch program?
So this is currently only available in ForeFlight Dispatch, but you don't need to have dispatchers to use Dispatch. And if you're not currently using Dispatch, you can get a trial just to play around with it and see what you think. But we have flight departments without dispatchers, just the pilots self-dispatching, and they're using the fuel advisor tool themselves.
Great. Okay. I think that about wraps it up. I see that we are still replying to a few questions in the queue, but I think we can go ahead and start signing off here. So like you can see on the screen, once again, you can learn more at foreflight.com/fuel advisor. We will likely have a recording of this webinar loaded up onto that page. So if you wanted to share that with others in your flight department to let them know about this new capability, you can go ahead and do that, and they'll be able to watch the same webinar that you just did. You can sign up to get started with Fuel Advisor at foreflight.com/fuel advisor form. Like Caitlin has been saying, our sales team will offer free trials for this. They're not at all stingy about giving away free trials for new things like this. So feel free to email sales@foreflight.com if you're interested in giving this a test run with your flight department. And of course, you can register for more webinars and watch past ones, including this one at foreflight.com/webinars starting tomorrow. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. Thanks, Caitlin and Daniel, for a great presentation. And we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar.